Jesus tells us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. But how does that work? Does it mean that we don't have to work at all? Just pray? And how do we square this with the fact that followers of Jesus starve to death every day who pray this prayer? Were their prayers not answered? This is what we will be discussing today on Living the Message. Hey, this is Living the Message, where we discuss how the message of Christ might dwell among us richly. I'm Pastor Eric Targe, and I'm here with Senior Pastor of the Moody Church, Philip Miller. Hey, Philip.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
Doing well.
Awesome.
So this past week, we continued through the Lord's Prayer.
Yep.
And we hit the section of our daily bread.
Yeah.
Give us this day our daily bread, which is like, I think we're so used to it, right? Because it's 2,000 years of saying this prayer,
right?
But there is something kind of weird about it.
It's very basic, right?
Yeah, Jesus is telling us to pray for just bread. Like, aren't there? I think there's a sense in all of us where we ask the question, like, aren't there greater kingdom issues at stake? Like, shouldn't we be asking for
Sure.
Like, shouldn't we be asking for big things? Why do you think Jesus is saying bread? Like, that's what we should be asking for.
Well, so it's really interesting because he the switch is actually in the prayer, right? It starts out, hallowed be your name,
big
right?
stuff.
In all the earth, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Bring heaven down to earth and make all things right.
Totally.
Bread. Like the contrast is right there, right? It goes from macro to this laser granular focus, micro attention. And I think that's intentional because Jesus is slingshotting from the great cosmic problems in the world to the most basic subsistence living level of our lives. And
so it's kind of like a range?
I think everything in between. We're talking about the world being set right. And here's the most basic level. I need food for today, right?
Yeah.
And I think it gets at this idea that we're contingent beings. We were made never to go off on our own, but to be forever umbilicaled to God, right? To use Jesus' language, elsewhere he'll say, abide in me, right? As the branch has to abide in the vine to bear fruit, your life is designed to be tethered to mine, and so that the energy and life of God might actually flow through, animate, and bring to fullness our lives. And so we're umbilical to God. We're contingent beings. We were never meant to be fiercely independent.
Yeah.
We were always meant to be children who have a father and to never graduate from that most basic relationship. I think that's what Jesus is getting at.
Yeah, I love that phrase of being umbilical to God, like recognizing he is the source of every resource that we have, whether it be the biggest things, such as the kingdom coming in, our big things in life, and the smallest things, like breadcrumbs.
Yeah. And what's beautiful, right, is bread is not just about bread. Bread, manna in the Old Testament, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. Yeah. Jesus repeats that when he's tempted, right? The same phrase. So the idea of bread being symbolic of pointing to our greater, utter dependency on God for life in every dimension, physical, spiritual, body, soul, everything we are. Yeah. That's what this prayer is getting at, that we can't live a day without God.
Well, I think what you bringing up manna actually brings us to a really good question that was texted in. We want to remind you always, you can text or email us. You can email at livingthemessage@moodychurch.org, or you can text us at 312-682-1888. That number is in the show notes. Be sure to text us your questions. We'd love to answer them. It helps us to go a little bit deeper because we don't think always the way that you guys think. And the question that was asked, I thought it was a really good one. Someone said, how would Jesus's original hearers have understood that phrase, daily bread? You said that it was kind of a made-up word, that Jesus made it up. And so there can be a little bit of confusion there, right? Like, is it like all of a sudden Jesus was saying, give us this day our ooga booga, and everyone's like, what is ooga booga? How do we ooga booga? Like, what is ooga boogieing?
Right.
Like, so how would they have heard that?
Well, it's not a nonsense word.
It's not a nonsense word.
But it is a coined phrase, right? And so it is true that we don't have an example of this word anywhere else in extant Greek manuscripts. So, so it is unique in that sense. But the bread part everyone would have understood. That's very easy, and it's kind of like just mushing together two words that normally don't go together, but you kind of create a new word. So, like we're familiar with Christmas Eve, but I might say today's my birthday Eve. And that's not a normal phrase.
No, but that resonates.
But you know exactly what I mean by that. And so what Jesus is saying here is, this is the next day's bread. I need next day's bread. Give me today next day's bread. And it is kind of a new phrase. Yeah. But I think his listeners would have picked up on the core essence of it pretty quickly.
Well, that's really helpful to get that background, that it wasn't completely made up. It's two words that were made into a kind of unusual compound
It's
word.
A compound. Yeah,
it's
a compound word.
That just hadn't been compounded before to our knowledge.
As far as we know. So So I think it would have drawn attention because it's new, it's novel, but it also wouldn't have been opaque on the surface. I think people would have intuitively grasped the essence of what he was trying to say. Yeah.
And it's for this one, it's not tomorrow Eve, or it's not our bread Eve, it's the bread of the next day.
Yeah, because really,
next day bread.
To just reiterate, when the manna came down, you collected daily bread every day. And then on Friday, day before Sabbath, you collected Sabbath bread in addition to your daily bread. And so it was the next day's bread. And so you have this overlay of the idea of Sabbath bread. Yeah. The idea of, like, if you're collecting the next day bread, you're collecting not just your daily provisions, but you're collecting bread for the future, which you're trusting in the promise of God that it's not going to turn to worms. It did that every day except for Sabbath. On that day, God supernaturally preserved the bread for the next day. And so Jesus is basically saying your future is in the hands of the Lord. Yeah. And every day you pray for the next day that God would actually entrust your future days to the Lord. I think that's the essence of what he's trying to get at.
So Jesus here is giving us a template. He's not saying this is a ritualistic prayer that we should necessarily be praying all the time. And I think that's
the idea that counts.
Yeah, it's the idea. And that part of it, our daily bread, I think that can be kind of confusing, or even our tomorrow bread. How would you say that we should actually go about praying that prayer for our tomorrow bread? Because it can feel like sometimes all we're doing is like reflecting backward, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I'm thankful for this food that is now before me. I'm thankful for, which is good. We need to be thankful. But how would you recommend praying for that tomorrow bread?
Yeah. Well, so here's what's interesting. Jesus is going to exposit this, in a sense, in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. He's going to talk about, do not worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about what you're going to drink, what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear. Your Father knows what you need before you even ask. He's going to take care of you. Just like the birds and the flowers, he's got you. And so the idea, I think, is I can do one of two things, basically, as it comes to the future of my life. I can worry about it, which is a control symptom. In other words, I think I have to be in charge and control of my tomorrows. And I've got to make sure my tomorrows work out the way I want. And so I've got to make sure that happens. And I worry about it. And I carry anxiety in my body about it. And it actually makes my life worse. Or I can entrust my tomorrows into the hands of God and rest in his kingdom reality that he's watching over and providing for me, and that all of my tomorrows are in his hands. And I think that's a fundamental posture shift in the way we relate to the future. And so anyway, I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, but that binary can be kind of difficult to navigate, right? It's like entrust is the word you said, and then control. Like those are the two things. But where is the line between praying for our daily bread and working for our daily bread? Yeah. Because I think we don't want to be people who are just saying, Lord, you're going to give it to me, and so we sit here all day and our family goes hungry. It's like, how do you?
Right. I'm trusting the Lord. Right.
Yeah.
So wherever the Bible talks about faith or dependency or abiding, it's always a proactive dependency. Proactive dependency.
So what do you mean by each of those words?
So there is a kind of dependency that's passive, or it's disengaged. It's sort of like, well, I'll just trust and just sit on the couch. And then there is a kind of activity that is striving, controlling, anxious. Like, I've got to make this happen. It's all on me. And I think the scriptures invite us into this proactive dependency where we recognize and release and open-handedly bring our lives to the Lord, surrendered to him. There's peace in that. And then we go about our lives and we work hard and we work with all of our heart. So the pattern is, pray about your cancer and go get treatment. Go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Right? Pray for a job and go apply for a job. Pray for daily bread and then go work and earn an income. Like, those are not opposed ideas.
Yeah.
But I can work strivingly as if it all depends on me and carry the weight of it. And that God says, don't carry that weight. That's mine. And yet I can also cast all my cares on him in such a way that then I become apathetic. And that's not the pattern either. It's let him carry the weight of it, and then you go do it, right? And that, I think, is the pattern of proactive dependency. So these are not opposed to each other. They're complementary.
Yeah, that's helpful. It's not passive. It's not anxious, and those can be scary types of dependency.
Right.
But it's a dependency that is surrendered and working.
Yeah, you surrender everything and then go work as hard as you can. It's working for the Lord, not for men. Like, that's your mandate. Like, even Paul says, if you don't go work, you don't deserve to eat. Like, right? I mean, there's this idea of, like, go work with your hands, be useful, be productive, do whatever you can, and trust the Lord at the same time. Those are two complementary things. Proactive dependency.
Now, part of the prayer is one of the important parts of this part of the prayer is that word "our," right?
Yeah.
Because we can tend to focus, as you brought up, on my daily bread, like, give me my needs. And I know you've talked in the past couple of weeks, even we've talked on Living the Message about this can become a laundry list thing. It's like, oh, I'm just coming to God with my laundry list, and we
Here's
need
all my problems
to correct that. One of the questions that we got texted in, thank you so much for texting us your questions, is how far does that hour go? Like, how far does that hour reach? Does it reach all the way to the Ukraine? Does it reach to different parts of the world where people are suffering? Because I think sometimes that can be overwhelming of, like, ooh, who should I be praying for? How much? And so, like, we can feel guilty if we haven't prayed the hour wide enough or maybe even close enough. So what would you say to that?
Yeah. So so the idea of our daily bread is that I actually have the prayerful burden of my neighbor's bread, their needs, is mine, right?
Yeah.
I'm not just a silo, isolated, where it's just my needs and God is just worried about my needs and I'm getting my needs met. And it's totally individual. There is a communal aspect to this.
Yeah.
Our daily bread. We all need bread. God's people need bread. My brothers and sisters, my neighbor needs bread. So I'm lifting up the needs of not just myself, but others. And I do think that is as wide as our circle of concern is. And I think the general principle is, if it's enough for me to have an emotion about it, I ought to pray about it. So if I watch the news and I'm distressed about a situation I hear about, I think that's worth praying about.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm having emotions about it at some level, I probably ought to bring that to the Lord, right?
Yeah.
Now, I probably shouldn't carry that alone. And what's amazing, right, is when you pray about the needs of people around you, it actually, like, becomes contagious. It, like, gets into your heart,
Yeah.
And then you start thinking, okay, I've been praying about it. It's on my heart. I'm carrying this to the Lord, and maybe I should do something about it. I don't know if you've had this experience, but, like, I'll be praying for people, and then I think I should really write them a note. Maybe we should send them a meal. Maybe I ought to connect them with this other person because they've been through something similar, and they could have some camaraderie in it. Like, so I become an actual agent of the very answer to my prayer, if you think about it.
Oh, totally.
In some sense. So it's not a passive, like, just throw it on God's lap so I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, it's not what, like, James says when he says that it's dangerous for Christians to go out and say, go be warm and well fed. It's more than that.
Yeah, never do anything about it, right?
Yeah, like, we're called to actually
my
get
prayerful
people warm and fed.
right, and my prayerful concern actually may lead me to further action and engagement. And so that's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's helpful to know. Like, okay, if you're experiencing this desire, if you're experiencing this concern, you should bring it to prayer.
That's
Whether
right.
if you're hearing it on the news, all those things. What if you tend toward quite the opposite? So it's like there's the extreme people. Like I know my wife. She is what you call maybe an empath, right? It's like you hear someone's burden and that weighs heavy on her. But there are other people that it's kind of like, either they've got their heads in the sand or they're just like, I don't know. I don't like, maybe they're overwhelmed with media, which I totally get, right? Like they're trying to shut off a little bit. What advice would you give them to actually begin thinking about that hour? Because there is the reaction right now of, I just don't want to know anything that's going on in the world. I don't want to know about my neighbor. I'm just too overwhelmed.
Well, so that's very real. I mean, social
is.
media and the presence of 24-hour news,
It's too much.
It can be very overwhelming. And that you either become hypersensitive to it all, and then you're vulnerable and anxious all the time, or you become calloused, and then you disengage, and it's just like, oh, another kid died. And it's like, you just disengage emotionally. And I think that's a bigger problem. We can't solve that all today.
Oh, no.
But I think the principle is I ought to be caring for something more than just my own needs. I ought to, as a part of my prayer life, be lifting the needs, the daily bread needs of my community to the Lord. I'm not just an isolated being. So if I'm only praying about my needs, probably expand the circle. If I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do and I'm anxious all the time, maybe throttling back makes sense. But the point is, don't carry it alone, right? Cast all of your cares on Him, for He cares for you. So if you care about something, bring it to Him. We weren't meant to carry it alone. That's part of being tethered, umbilical to the Lord. Is like we don't actually have enough resources to handle all of the craziness of life on our own. We were meant to run to our Father, climb up in His lap, and have Him carry our burden with us, right? That's part of being a child. So I think if we are feeling crippled, maybe a good question is then, am I bringing this to the Lord? Am I bearing it alone? Or am I sharing the load with Him because He cares for me? Do I really believe that enough to bring the worry, the anxiety, the stress, the sorrow, the tears, and actually entrust them into His presence, right? I think that's a different way to move through those emotions. Right.
And I think likewise, I think you'd say, like, if you're never feeling any burden for your neighbor, it might be your prayer might need to be, Lord, would you help me?
Break my heart for what breaks yours. Jesus is a man of sorrows. The Father is near to the brokenhearted. The Spirit groans with us in our weakness. Those are all heavy words. And God is not afraid of those spaces. And in His strength and power, we can go there too.
We need to care for the things God cares about. I was just recently reading through Jonah, and I felt like that really came to mind at the end of the book, right? The end of the book.
Should I not be concerned about this great city?
He's angry at Jonah because Jonah isn't hurting. His heart doesn't match God's heart. He's not upset about the things God is upset with. And so if you're feeling like, hey, maybe there's nothing that I can pray for of the hour part, maybe you need to be seeking the Lord and saying, okay, Lord, what's breaking your heart? And would you show that to me?
Let me see this city. Let me see my neighbors. Let me feel what you feel, the concern that you have. I think that's a good prayer.
There are so many people, though, that are praying this prayer, right? For the past 2,000 years, there have been people praying this prayer, brothers and sisters in Christ in countries all over the world who pray it, and they don't seem to have it answered, right? Like they die of starvation. Starvation is a problem all over the world, even today, which I think for us in the United States, that feels so, like it feels so distant. For those probably listening to a podcast, if you have the ability to listen to a podcast, that probably isn't as much of a struggle.
Right.
But how do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of the fact that this is the prayer Jesus gave, and it's not answered for some, or at least it doesn't seem to be answered for some?
It's a really good question. So I think this is where we just have to acknowledge there are Christians who have prayed, give us this day our daily bread, who have starved. Right? That has happened. So we have to bring this into this like theological moment where we go, okay, wait a minute. What does this mean? It can't mean that we're guaranteed bread in every situation. It can't mean that, because that otherwise it's a promise that's not fulfilled, right?
Yeah.
So what does it mean? What does it mean? And I think getting back to the notion of the prayer is ultimately about my life is utterly dependent on God, that he is a good father, I am his child, and every moment, every breath, every heartbeat, every meal, every spiritual resource, I live in utter dependency upon God. Like that is the posture of my life. I think that's what we're after. We're confessing our utter neediness and dependency upon God, that we are helpless unless he provides.
Yeah.
We're
Bread
confessing
is
that.
not bread. Bread
It's
is
not just about bread.
bread is sustenance.
And so if you think about it, if you are utterly dependent on the Lord, you have been tethered to Jesus Christ, your life is eternally secure in him. If he doesn't give you your last meal on earth and you die, he will give you your first meal in glory. And there is a sense in which, even if you die of starvation, you have forever bread in the presence of God.
Yeah.
For eternity. Now that's hard. That's hard theology, because we think, oh God, would you rescue me out of this? But here's the beautiful truth of all of this is that if God is for us, and if we are tethered to the life of the kingdom of heaven, there is always a tomorrow for children of God. The tomorrow bread always will come. There's always life and hope on the horizon. The most important things can never be taken away. So even if God doesn't rescue me in the way that maybe I intended when I prayed, give me today my daily bread, I'm starving here.
Yeah.
In a sense, he answers it because he's going to nourish and strengthen me, body and soul, for eternity in the presence of glory at his right hand. And that's actually better for us. To be with him forever. And so it's kind of like the thief on the cross, right?
Yeah.
Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. I don't know what he meant by that. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was thinking Jesus is going to like pull some big cosmic gotcha move and like pop off the cross and like kingdom come and just glory right there. And he's like, just don't leave me hanging, like bring me with you, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus says, today, you will be with me in paradise. I'm going to answer that prayer today.
Yeah.
But you're actually going to go through the cross to glory rather than being rescued from the cross, right? And there's a sense in which there's a hard theology there of God may not rescue us in the way we think, but he is for us and he will always be enough for us. There's always a tomorrow for children of God with their good father. That's beautiful, actually.
Yeah. I think when we think of the daily bread as that Sabbath bread, which you talked about, saying that it's not just the provision, but it's trusting in the promise. I think that really makes so much sense of that question, of our brothers and sisters in Christ who die without their bread. They have to trust not only in his provision, but in his promise that he'll provide tomorrow. And that's the promise of heaven. It's the promise of a new kingdom. It's
and Sabbath rest, and the final rest that we're waiting for, and that the future Sabbath bread, the Sabbath kingdom, the Sabbath life of eternal life in the presence of God, like that future is promised, guaranteed. No worms can touch it. No maggots will destroy it, right? No rust, no decay. There is an inheritance kept in heaven for us. And so we trust him. Even on those hard days when so much is lost, there is glory just around the corner. And I think that is probably the way to think about that.
Well, what is the daily bread that you're praying for right now? Maybe you've got something that you're saying, hey, you know what? I need to expand this to the rest of my community. Leave that in the comments. Engage with us. We love to talk with you, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this important topic of give us this day our daily bread. You can send your thoughts or your questions to us always by email at livingthemessage@moodychurch.org or texting us. Once again, that number is 312-682-1888. 8. We love hearing from you. If you've been listening to Living the Message regularly, or maybe you just enjoyed this one episode, we want to encourage you today to make sure to like, subscribe, give us a rating. We always appreciate that. And if you would, send this to someone else. Let them know how it's been a blessing to you, and we can share it that way. We really hope that you were encouraged, equipped, and enabled to now go and live the message.